Good morning. In Luke chapter 21, Jesus says, "There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken." Then he told them a parable. "Look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is already near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." One day, I was on call as a chaplain at the hospital. Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when all the other chaplains had left for the evening, my beeper went off. I received 3 urgent calls, one after another. The next day, chaplains gathered at 8 in the morning to hear a report on how things went through the night. I reported, well, at 5, as you were all leaving, I received 3 calls right there together. I was standing in line at our hospital Chick-fil-A, and when the manager heard my beeper sounding, he said, "Wow, you've got a lot of calls there." I said, "Yes, and they're all urgent. Could you leave the restaurant and sit with one of these patients until I can get finished with the other 2? My fellow chaplains are listening as well as anyone can at 8 a.m. I continued. The manager said, "Sure," and so he went and he sat with that patient. I expected the whole room to laugh at such a ridiculous story. No, Chick-fil-A managers do not catch pastoral calls in the hospital any more than I get to fry the chicken. Instead, one chaplain said, "That manager is really a nice guy." Other folks shook their head in agreement. Not a single soul laughed at such a ridiculous notion. I almost said, "I'm messing with you," and then decided to just let the story stand. To this day, they believe that happened. Do you know what kind of story that is? We call that a tall tale. We call that a story with embellishments. But since then, I've thought about it. The Chick-fil-A manager really is a wonderful person. Might he not have gone out on the floor and sat with the hurting? Now my fellow chaplains have me thinking. In the Bible, you have the same things going on. There's history, the fun kind, where you stretch the memories long and tall to make your point. There's poetry, of the kind that gives you a voice when you're hurting and when you're celebrating. We look over the shoulder of Paul and James and people whose names have long since escaped us. We look over their shoulders and read their mail. We call these epistles. Jesus is a storyteller. A man went into a field and sowed seed. A man went on a journey. A son asked his father for his inheritance, and in doing so basically said, "Daddy, drop dead and give me the bread." A man had 99 sheep and one of them went missing. There was this wedding, and there we found bridesmaids gone wild. Jesus told stories, not just to make us laugh, to make us cry, but to make us think. Jesus told us stories to make of us God's people. So there are all kinds of stories in the Bible. To understand the Bible, you have to know what kind of stories you're reading. In the newspaper, we find news stories, editorials, obituaries, and comics. Just like you don't read the newspaper all the same, we don't read the Bible all the same. We know when we're supposed to laugh and supposed to cry, supposed to get angry, and supposed to get on with life. So there are also all kinds of Bible stories in faith. To understand Judaism, to understand Islam, to understand Christianity, you have to know what kind of stories you are reading. We've always used stories to help us tell the truth in a way that can be heard. After all, it's hard to hear someone say, "You're a racist and God isn't pleased with you." So in the Gospels, there's a story of Jesus being approached by a person of a race not his own. And when she asks for healing for her daughter, Jesus says, "It is not right to give the food meant for the folks at the table to the dogs living on the floor." In the story, Jesus' kind of folks were at the table, and the woman's kind of folks were the dogs. Then this woman turns the tables and finishes the story. Yes, she says, but even the puppies can get the crumbs that fall from the table. Jesus learned a long time ago, as did the writers of the Bible, that if you just call someone a racist, call someone a sinner, call someone selfish, call someone a liar, they'll just stick their fingers in their ears and not listen. But if you can call them a story and make them a part of it, then they will give you a hearing. Somewhere down the road later, when they get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, they'll say, "Hey, he was telling me I'm selfish." And truth that comes home at 3 a.m., far from the hustle of the day, is truth that gets a hearing. Christianity is about the stories, the Bible stories, the Jesus stories, the people stories, the Pfafftown stories. So here we are rooting around in Luke's gospel. Jesus is just about done with his public teaching. Just one more story to tell. After this, his public ministry is done and he will be murdered. So at the end, Jesus tells a story about the end. He talks about hard times coming when the Romans lay siege to Jerusalem in a few decades. He can see persecution coming for the little band he has as followers, who will soon, in the outpost of Antioch, become known as Christians. He speaks of his people being a people of hardships, of persecutions, of being made to live in a world seemingly coming apart at the creative seams. He warns there will be roaring and shaking. There will be fainting and fear. There will be wastefulness and drunkenness. Worries will clamp down on you like a steel trap. The kind of life the people were facing then, and some people have faced in every age, even unto today. Well, it's all in the story. Knowing he is about to be crucified, knowing his disciples will in the coming years be scattered in the wind of persecution, knowing Jerusalem will be sacked by the Romans in an insurrection you can just smell in the wind. Knowing these things, Jesus tells them a story of things to come. But it isn't just about persecutions and hardships to come. It's also about his coming. It's also about not being left alone, but the fact that when he returns, things getting turned up right and just in a world that sometimes wobbles harshly on its axis of rotation. When you are broken down, Jesus says to make the effort to look up. Light will break in the darkness, and the darkness will not overcome it. So Jesus stands right up in the face of hard times, and he knows that if he just says better days are coming, then folks will be so overwhelmed by the bad that they won't hear the good. They will clog their ears with despair and not hear the hope. So he tells them a story about trees. Trees whose roots go down deep and branches look up, up, up into every season of life. A story meant to be received as a future truth. Perhaps this is what makes the Christian stories so very powerful for us. They sound outlandish, they smack of tall tales, but this ear-catching quality also carries within them the kind of story we can only see by faith. They carry a truth that is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. So for a story to carry us, the stories themselves, no matter how funny or sad, real or cartoonish, must carry the truth. Marlene and I were visiting Blacktop Mountain in North Georgia. We wanted a pre-supper stroll. We gawked over the map on the desk at the ranger station, instructed by the young lady behind the counter that the trail you are considering is an easy hike. Over an hour later, we were crawling up the side of the mountain on our hands and knees, tongues dragging in the dirt. Our mouths so dry, our bodies so strained, I cannot verbalize what I'm now thinking about the person back at the station. I was not being kind. When we crested the mountain, I said between great heaving attempts at not passing out, I know one thing. That lady has never hiked this trail a day in her life. From the vantage of your hiney behind the counter, they are all easy. You know what kind of story that woman told us? we call it a lie. Of all the stories I know from the Bible, of all the stories Jesus tells, of all the stories we may tell, the worst is not the tall tale, the funny, the sad. The worst is the one that carries no truth. The worst is a lie. When we tell stories that are a lie, we cause people who are already burdened to find the way is steepened to the point that they cannot go on. We crush the already broken. We push over the already teetering. But to move life to understanding, to healing, to hope, stories must carry within them the truth. And so there is this poem high up in a hospital next to an intensive care unit that marks the perilous journey between hope and desperation. There on the wall, words by Gwendolyn Brooks. Say to them, say to the downkeepers, the sun slappers, the self-soilers, the harmony hushers, even if you are not ready for day, it cannot always be night. You will be right, for that is the hard home run. Live not for battles won, live not for the end of the song. Live in the along. Even if you are not ready for day, it cannot always be night. In hospitals, the story of life goes on. I swear they do in that ICU sometimes things that smack of a tall tale. In the day of Jesus, in the time of war, persecution, and despair, the story of life goes on. I sometimes shake my head over it in our own time. What Jesus is about seems sometimes as truth being swallowed by the lie. But in the face of this, we know that Jesus did not come just at Christmas, but Jesus is coming again. Here is Jesus' story, light, over and against the illness in our loved ones' lives. Jesus' story and light, over and against the hardships in our neighbors' households. If this story from Jesus reminds me of anything, it is that the stories of liars, of naysayers, of the downkeepers, the sun slappers, the self-soilers, the harmony hushers, well, they cannot abide. Jesus' light is breaking, and the stories are taking hold in our lives, so that even if you are not ready for day, it cannot always be night. Thanks be to God. Amen.